A team to observe the elections in Zimbabwe. ENCA's Zimbabwe correspondent Pindai Dube filed this report.
SADC observers say they will make sure that all political parties contesting in Zimbabwe follow the country's electoral laws. The main opposition MDC is already at loggerheads with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission ZEC over ballot papers and the voters' roll. The mission has promised to scrutinize the concern raised.
Our mission to these elections will report on what we observe. At the end of the day, our will into our member states, we have to find a common ground, and the common ground is set out by the laws of the land in that specific countries. To say that, again, just to repeat of what was presented before, we are here to observe elections against the sets of rules and regulations provided in the laws of the land.
The mission has been blasted for failing to resolve disputes during former President Robert Mugabe's era.
SADC has been useless from our past elections. We can count the past 3 elections that SADC has been here as observers. They've ruled elections to be free and fair, but we have seen the opposite of free and fairness in an election. So to me, SADC is like one toothless. I mean, it shouldn't be. You then wonder why it's even present to observe our elections in Zimbabwe or any other country for that matter, because they cannot change anything and they cannot oppose the status quo when it conducts itself in a wrong manner.
It is important and apparent that we realize that SADC is just an observer mission and they are not doing anything more than just observing. And to expect them to do anything other than observing would be fooling ourselves. Clearly, they have failed to stand to the expectations of Zimbabweans, that is to stand with us, because what is important to realize is that Zimbabweans feel that they don't have anyone to stand with them and to stand by them and to intervene in circumstances which become difficult.
The upcoming polls will be the first without Mugabe, who was removed from power late last year following a de facto coup. He ruled since Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980. Over 100 political parties and 23 presidential candidates will contest the polls. The front-runners remain Emmerson Mnangagwa's governing ZANU-PF and the main opposition MDC alliance led by Nelson Chamisa. Pindai Dube, Harare, Zimbabwe.
There are growing fears over the credibility of Zimbabwe's poll. Observers have arrived from SADC, as we mentioned there, the US and the UN. But can the country's Electoral Commission overcome allegations of ghost voters and other irregularities to provide a free and fair ballot? Our reporter Aldrin Sampear is in Harare, joins us now with the latest. What are you hearing about these allegations, Aldrin?
Well, these are some allegations that have been raised by the observer missions here in Zimbabwe ahead of the elections as well. And the Electoral Commission's response this morning was that all those issues have been rectified. They said that heading before the proclamation of the voters' roll back on the 29th of May, there were some errors on the voters' roll, and all those issues have been rectified. You remember that these have been issues that have been raised by the opposition parties, especially considering that on the voters' roll you had people who had their birth dates on the, like during the 18th century, who still remain on the voters' roll here in Zimbabwe. However, though, the Electoral Commission now saying that all those issues have been ironed out, and all interested parties, including the candidates who are contesting these elections, as well as the various political parties, 133 of those political parties have been given access to the voters' roll.
Okay, and the fact that there are other observers this time, it's a first. It didn't happen under Mugabe. Does this suggest that possibly they're not getting the sort of access that they need?
Well, certainly quite a number of observer missions that you have here compared to the previous elections. And just looking at the auditorium where the Electoral Commission as well as the police were briefing these observer missions, there were quite a number of observer missions coming from across the world, including the Commonwealth. You remember that Zimbabwe has pleaded with the leader of the Commonwealth, this is the Queen Elizabeth, that they want to be readmitted to the Commonwealth, as well as observer missions from the United Nations, as well as the African Union. And quite interesting, just considering the budget constraints that the Electoral Commission has been facing in Zimbabwe. And speaking to the CEO earlier on, he said that their budget was standing at around $150 million, and the Zimbabwean government could only give them about 90 million, and it had to be the United Nations as well as the African Union who then stepped in to cover all the other funding that the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission would need to ensure that these elections are free and credible. And indeed, there hasn't been any complaints from the observer missions, and so far as it comes to being given access to these various polling stations where the voting will be taking place, as well as access to information about how the voting will be happening. And just considering this morning's briefing as well, where the observer missions were given an opportunity to actually ask questions directly to the police commander who is leading the police in these elections, as well as the Electoral Commission.
Let's listen to what the ZANU-PF frontrunner candidate had to say about security concerns and the threats against his life.
The attempts have been so many. This is not the first attempt on my life. It doesn't, to me, it's normal. I've been used to these attempts some 6 times.
And Ngagua is saying that there'd been several attempts on his life. What sort of security are we seeing, and what are people saying about violence? Because obviously, you know, in the years gone by, that was a big problem when it came to the elections.
That there has been around 150, just over 150 cases of assault related to these elections that have been recorded, and that are currently also under investigation, and saying that there have been 3 convictions so far, but also ensuring and assuring these observer missions that the environment is conducive for a peaceful election that will ensure that these elections are free and fair and meet the credible standards that have been set by all the other observer missions, including SADC.
So there are over 100 parties. That's a lot of people to choose from. Tell us about the front runners and what we will be looking for in these elections, Aldrin.
Well, certainly, the front runners, it is Emmerson Mnangagwa, who is the incumbent, the caretaker president, as some has referred to him, after taking over from the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, as well as Nelson Chamisa. Those are the people who are in the front run to becoming president of this country. And just looking at some of the polls that have been run by various companies and survey companies here in the country, they indicate that it is neck and neck, that these 2 candidates stand neck and neck. Although, of course, you have about 23 candidates who are standing to become president of this country, there are only these 2. And both of them actually have a lot to prove in terms of the legitimacy. Some have argued that Emmerson Mnangagwa came through what they call a soft coup, which means that he doesn't have the popular vote of the people here in this country. That's not how he got to power. Where on the other hand as well, you have Nelson Chamisa, who on the other hand, there have been these accusations around that within the party, the MDC alliance now, which has various other opposition parties that have come together, that he actually forced his way to the top of the MDC after the passing on of Morgan Tsvangirai, that he was not voted in by the committee of the MDC. They believe that he was appointed.
Of Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, exiting from the plane to attend the BRICS summit, which all kicks off a little bit later this week. As you know, that's China, Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa tagged on towards the end. More on Zimbabwe when you come back, and Trump, Tehran, and Twitter. Why Iran is back in the US president's crosshairs tonight. We head to Washington for the latest, but we'll be back very soon.